And now we continue our live in-depth coverage of the state right here on WPRI.com and on Facebook Live. We just heard from Governor Gina Raimondo, her 2020 State of the State address. We're joined by Eyewitness News political analyst Joe Fleming. Joe, you've sat through a lot of these. Yes. We have together for a long time. Sometimes they sound similar, but this one was a little bit different.
Yes, it was a little bit different. I mean, the governor's not up for re-election, so she's term limited, so she can say what she wants, and she tries to get her proposals across. I think she really stressed two things tonight. The expand the real job initiative. It's a big thing that she wants. She believes if we expand that, it's going to help the economy of Rhode Island, and education. Two strong points that she had tonight that she has to try to push through the General Assembly.
And we actually have a soundbite from Governor Raimondo's speech specifically talking about education. Let's listen to that.
Every single one of us, every single Rhode Islander has a stake in this work. And I'd ask you all tonight to ask yourselves what you can do to support this work. And I'd ask you to do something else, all of us. I'd ask you to challenge yourselves to see beyond the borders of your own community, your own neighborhood, your own city, or your own town. Of course, we all want the best for our own kids. But we all also have a stake in the children in the next town, or all the way across the state. Schools in every community have to do better. And so tonight, I'm announcing an additional $30 million to support students and teachers in every community in our state.
She's talking about the $30 million here, Joe. We don't know how that's going to be distributed. Barrington might not get the same amount of money as, let's say, Woonsocket.
Right. I would think not, especially if it's going to be aimed towards people who have don't speak English very well. The thing is, though, that will be accepted very well by the General Assembly. They like to bring money back into their communities. So $30 million going to education is something I think a lot of legislators will support. The question is, how is it going to be distributed? Is it based on the number of kids in your community, or does each city and town get the same amount of money?
Because she talked about a few different things that $30 million that she wants it to do, between college prep courses, multilingual learners, mental health professionals in schools was a big one.
It was, and it got a lot of applause on that. The question is, though, all the things she's talking about, $30 million goes away pretty quick when you're talking about 39 cities and towns in the state of Rhode Island. So she has to really define where she wants to spend that money.
Yeah.
Buildings will be one of them, too.
No question. They've been doing a lot of repairs of the buildings now with this bond that was passed in the last election. A lot of communities are going. I know Pawtucket's already done like 2 or 3 schools. So I think you're going to see that continuing. And I think as the schools get repaired and fixed up, they're going to be set up for the 21st century.
Any frustration, though, from the point of the taxpayer, where you have, on a state level, passing money for more money for schools, then on local levels in towns, people raising taxes as well, or voting to raise more taxes.
And most of the money in the local levels going for the schools.
Yeah.
So if they see it coming from the state, it should not affect them locally, they would hope. But if they see the state giving more money and the towns giving more money, that's when the voters get upset in the local communities. They're saying again from both ways. But some city and towns, the local community supports the schools a lot more than the state does.
Right. Eyewitness News politics Senator Ted Nesi and Target 12 investigator Steph Machado was following this State of the State address from the State House tonight. They join us now live. Hey, guys.
I was here as well, and I would say in some ways there were no surprises in this speech, relatively few. We have a governor in her 6th year. We know her policy agenda, as you guys were saying back in the studio: education, job training, her continued push for the gun bills, the line item veto. But I'm curious, you were sitting right up front. I saw you there. What did you find interesting about what got the biggest applause lines, and what the reaction was from the lawmakers? We'll decide.
Yeah, there was a major standing ovation, Ted, when she talked about battling climate change. She said she wants to make Rhode Island 100% renewable by the end of the decade. How that's going to come about is obviously still to be seen, but a major standing ovation for that. Of course, when she talked about her education priorities, also a lot of applause for that when she mentioned expanding pre-K to about 700 more seats for 4-year-olds in Rhode Island. We saw, the Senate President and the Speaker standing up as well and joining in the applause. As we know, they don't always support every one of her initiatives, so it's interesting to
say
see
the least
when they stand up and applaud applaud and when they remain in their seats, as they did for the assault weapons bill, for example.
Yeah, and you, of course, you're our Providence City Hall reporter. You're up there, and I would say story number one in the city right now is the schools takeover, which did come up, from the conversations you have up there with council members, with the mayor, with residents and parents. What did you take away from what the governor had to say about the Providence schools takeover?
Well, first of all, since her last State of the State address, we have a new state education commissioner, and the state has taken over the Providence schools. So obviously that was something she was going to mention in the speech, and she did mention it in the speech. She said, it was unacceptable and that the schools need to improve. And she did, she made it a point to say that lessons that are learned in Providence with this state takeover will be applied statewide. Obviously, she wants to make it clear to folks in Rhode Island that
Right.
It's not just all about Providence. She did not mention giving any particular more funding to Providence. She did, as we said, say $30 million statewide, but they have said that Providence, they did this financial analysis and said that, look, it looks like they're getting enough money, they just need to spend it better.
Mm-hmm. So, it was interesting to me, Steph, because I felt like part of it was you could feel the gov getting into legacy mode, right? You can see, she's in her 6th year, in her 2nd term. We're not hearing about a lot of big new splashy initiatives so much as trying to solidify things she's already passed and keep them in place. Rhode Island Promise, the free tuition program, talking about her work on healthcare, trying to get more pre-K seats. But the other question, of course, is what we didn't hear tonight, which is there's a $200 million deficit. Didn't hear her talking a lot about the tough choices that will have to be made when that comes out on Thursday. What are you watching for when the budget comes out, the actual full budget text Thursday, that maybe we didn't hear as much about tonight?
Yeah, we're going to look at whether there's any, new taxes or fees, for example, on employers who don't offer health insurance to their employees. That's been one that she's tried to do before, to add a tax to those employers. We're obviously going to be looking for a marijuana legalization proposal. There was no mention of marijuana in her State of the State speech, but we are expecting that to be in the budget proposal. So it's just sort of, how will they fill that gap? How will they get some new revenues from various taxes and fees in order to pay for all the stuff she's proposing? All
right, well, Steph has much more, a full, thorough recap right now on WPRI.com that you can look at when this web show is over. Coming up, I'll be live with Commerce Secretary Stephen Pryor to ask him about some of the initiatives we heard tonight and how they're going to pay for them. But for now, I'll send it back to you.
All right, Ted and Steph, thanks so much. And really encourage you to check out Steph's article. She's like a walking encyclopedia of the Rhode Island budget. She can just recite all of it to you. But I want to touch on something they brought up, which is housing. And it's something that's kind of new for Governor Raimondo that we haven't seen in her past speeches, Joe.
Yeah, it seems to be the first time she's really stressing the housing tonight. I think the thing is she wants to put a bond up for housing. I think that's going to get a lot of support in the General Assembly because people are looking for affordable housing throughout the state of Rhode Island. So I would assume that's going to have a good chance to get on the ballot. And if it does, Rhode Islanders tend to support bonds very strongly in the state of Rhode Island. So if they can get it to the ballot, I really think that's going to have a good chance to pass.
Well, you listened to her at the beginning, so many jobs, 500,000 jobs, but a lot of those jobs are not paying enough for people to pay their rent.
For their own houses, and that's what she's talking about. This bond referendum, I think, would help those people get houses and buy houses, and hopefully she's talking about by better education, these people will get better jobs. So it's a whole cycle, and if she can get the cycle working, she believes it's going to help the state of Rhode Island greatly.
Let's listen to a part of the speech where she did talk about the housing crisis.
Our housing shortage threatens all of our economic progress. This year I propose a housing bond and, for the first time ever in Rhode Island, a dedicated funding stream to build more housing. Nearly every other state already has it. So let's do it, and let's get to work building more homes in Rhode Island.
Is it tough with towns and pushback locally?
I think in some towns it is, because some people don't mind new housing coming in, but when new housing comes in, that means the schools are going to be taxed more people are in the schools, city services are going to be taxed more. So that's where a lot of towns are a little skeptical.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why you see pushback in some of these cities and towns in Rhode Island for a lot of new housing developments.
And one of the cures to all this is increasing business and jobs and bringing corporations in. Let's go back live to the State House now with politics editor Ted Nesi is with the Commerce Secretary Stephen Pryor. Ted?
Here we go. Mike, thank you. Commerce Secretary, thanks for being with us here.
My pleasure, Ted.
So I want to ask you about a couple of things we heard about tonight. Sure. You're known as one of the governor's most influential cabinet members.
Tallest.
Definitely tallest.
Members, yes.
I'll give you that one. Look, I was up here last year at the end of the negotiations on the budget. You folks were frustrated about some of the decision-making made around the job training program. We heard a lot about that tonight. I assume that wasn't an accident.
Well, the main reason is that it's essential that we have the connection between our workforce and the jobs we're creating. You know, as the governor emphasized, we're at an all-time high number of jobs. We broke the 500,000 job barrier, and we've stayed above it. We're at a 3.5% unemployment rate. Our economy is doing very well, but we need to ensure that Rhode Islanders are able to access these jobs. And the key to doing that is job training on the one hand and education on the other, which is why I think she really equally emphasized those two things. On the job training front, we've been appreciative of the General Assembly's generosity. They have enabled us to create the Real Jobs Rhode Island program and other programs, the Wavemaker Fellowship, the P-TECH program, but the signature program is Real Jobs. We do need to make sure that we create a sustainable way to ensure that Real Jobs can provide all the job connections through training that are possible. So it's really essential. We hear it all the time from employers that the limiting factor of their growth is the availability of a skilled and qualified workforce. So now let me also mention education, because equally the governor emphasized that. And from pre-K through 12, we have to ensure we have a strong system, but also that access to higher education that Rhode Island Promise enables.
The other thing that was interesting was housing. I don't think I've ever heard housing get as much of the spotlight as it did tonight. As the Commerce Secretary, when you think about economic development, why has that risen on the agenda for the administration?
Well, as our economy has strengthened, it's become clearer and clearer that workforce is important, and we need to make sure that we have housing that's accessible to, that's affordable for workers to ensure that we fuel the economy. It also is the case, as you analyze this problem of housing, Rhode Island is the only state in the entire Northeast that does not have a dedicated funding stream for housing production. So we need to fix that. That's what the governor is aiming at. And quite frankly, when you do build housing, this is a secondary point, but it's a very important point. That's construction. That means construction jobs. It further fuels the economy. So it's really important that we dedicate some energy towards and resources towards housing.
You know, always in the state, you hear lots of things people like the sound of. Let's have more education. Let's have more housing. Let's have more of this. Let's have more of that. But you're starting with a $200 million deficit. You know, are all our taxes going up? Where is the administration going to find the money to make good on these promises tonight?
The governor will propose a balanced budget. She has figured out the right mix of solutions to enable that budget to be balanced. It does cohere, it does work, and you'll see more on Thursday.
All right, not giving the game away just yet. Commerce Secretary Stephen Pryor, thank you. And coming up after this, I'll have two lawmakers, one from each side of the aisle, giving their reactions off the cuff to the governor's speech. We'll have them in a few minutes. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Ted. So he said something right there. Obviously, if you're going to do affordable housing, you're building. I would think that the laborers union would be backing this plan by
I
the
would
governor.
definitely think so, Mike. It's going to be more jobs in the state of Rhode Island to build all these houses and developments. So, I mean, it's something the unions would definitely support, I would believe.
And of course, we did hear the GOP response right after the governor's speech, specifically to housing. Let's listen to that.
We do have a housing crisis in this state, and it is directly related to Rhode Island's failure to attract capital investment. Right now, good, bad, or indifferent, we have laws on the books that allow for-profit developers to bypass local zoning in order to build dense developments, as long as a portion of that includes an affordable component. This is in nearly every town. That's on the books right now. The problem is that people do not want to invest in Rhode Island. If we fix the fundamentals of our economy, the housing crisis will be fixed by private investment responding to the pent-up demand. We do not need more taxpayer money in bonding. We need to nurture private investment.
Thoughts, Joe?
My thoughts are that they're talking two different ways. The Republicans want to go with private investments. The Democrats are talking about going with bonding. He's saying the economy has to improve. Well, unemployment's down very low in Rhode Island, 3.5%. I don't know how much better it's going to get.
But what happens if we have a recession, though?
That's the problem. I think that's something the Rhode Island lawmakers have to look at very carefully this year. If a recession comes along and we're still having a $200 million deficit, what's going to happen then? So, I mean, they got a lot of plates to balance this time. And I think the bonds for the housing is one thing they may go forward with.
Do you think it was interesting at the end, you know, Ted said that legacy talk that, that the governor's setting up, and she's saying, picture 20 years, picture 20 years. How important is it that she starts setting up kind of everything so that the next person that comes in, of course she's hoping, will carry that out?
Well, again, she still has 3 more years to be the governor of the state of Rhode Island. Now that we're 4-year terms. But I think she's looking long range. She knows a lot of these programs she wants to do. Takes a long time. When she first became governor the first year, I remember people criticizing her. Gee, the employment's still high, nothing's happening yet. It takes time to have these programs develop. And that's why she's starting right now to get them. So by the time she leaves, a lot of these programs will be in place in Rhode Island.
You want them in place because you don't want all your work to just go down the drain,
exactly.
right?
All right, so we heard a lot of applause when she was delivering her speech. What are lawmakers thinking? We're going to see it and hear from it over the next couple of days. But Ted Nesi is with Representative Brian Newberry and Ryan Pearson to get their reaction to the governor's speech tonight. Ted?
Yeah, Mike, I'm here with 2 veterans of Smith Hill. They've seen a number of states of the state addresses. They've seen a number of budgets, and that's Senator Ryan Pearson. And continuing to be a Republican state representative, but no longer the House Minority Leader, Brian Newberry. I think he doesn't mind. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. So I want to ask you guys first, just your top-level reactions to what you heard from the governor tonight. Senator Pearson, you first.
Yeah, sure. So I think what we really heard from the governor tonight is continuing to make the investments in improving our economy. So whether that be education, transportation, so many of the things, housing, that we need to do to keep Rhode Island's economy moving forward. I think she tried to lay out that agenda, and we're looking forward to working with her as we go through the session.
And you, Representative, what do you think from the other side of the aisle?
Look, it's easy to criticize, but I thought the speech fell flat. If you think about it, the details, what matters is the budget proposal, which we don't have tonight, and that's fine. But she talked about a lot of things. There were some applause lines they didn't really take. There's a lot of questions about where she's going to get the money to spend some of the stuff she wants to do. And until we actually see the budget document, which is not as fun to watch as a speech, we don't know. So I don't want to be critical for being critical's sake, but it was a speech. It was what it was.
What do you think? I'm curious if you guys heard something in there, first of all, that you think is going to be pretty easily rallied around among rank and file lawmakers, something that you're like, that's probably going to get some traction. What do you think on that?
So I think 2 things. First is continuing the education funding formula, which will not be a surprise coming from me. But
you've just finished a report on that, I believe.
We have. Yeah. So I think continuing to make sure that we're following that formula, which is what she talked about this evening, is really important. The second thing that I think has just been a hot button has been DCYF. So for years, there's been underfunding of DCYF, despite the legislature trying to make sure that the funding was sufficient. I think those 2 things are going to be things that we just see as off the table. They have to be done. We've got to make sure we get it done.
Anything you think the Republicans won't mind, might cast a vote for?
Well, actually, on the DCYF funding, I fully support that because that was our proposal to put more funding in last year's budget, which was shot down because it was a minority proposal on the floor, but now it's apparently going to be adopted by the governor. That's good. Car tax phase out. She wants to continue that. That was also our idea before 2016. I'm not being critical. That's great. If we propose ideas and Democrats adopt them, I'm all for it. I also think her talk about a housing bond is interesting. One of the things I find about Democratic politics in general is they're very good at identifying problems. It's the solutions they take issue with. We have a housing crisis in the state. Housing is way too expensive. Throwing money at it isn't the issue. Reducing the cost of building it is the question. So I want to see details. It goes back to what I said earlier. We need to see the details in the proposal and how it's going to come out.
Well, I'm curious what you think on that. You're a banker by day, Senator Pearson.
Yep.
I mean, is just throwing money at the housing problem not the right answer?
So I don't think that's everything, right? And so I think and I know the Senate presidents created the Housing Commission as well. I think certainly affordable housing is important, but there are so many other things. I hear from builders and contractors that are constituents of mine all the time about so many local regulations and land use sizes and zoning. There's so much more we can do on housing. So no, it's not just money, but it is a key part of getting us going forward.
I agree. That's my point. There's a lot more to it.
All right, finally, you're both lawmakers who actually read the budget, unlike maybe a few of your colleagues up here. We won't name any names. So what did you not hear about tonight that you're going to flip right to or look for when the actual budget proposal from the governor, the full thing, comes out on Thursday?
Yeah, so I think it's how we pay for a lot of things that we talked about tonight. And so we know that the governor started the year with a deficit that she had to close. She's proposed a lot of new initiatives and new spending here, and that always becomes the challenge, particularly on the education front. There's a lot of money there that we need to be worrying about. And so how she paid for pre-K. Really, we didn't pay for it last year. So there are so many things that we need to do and look at in the details. And so this is where the sausage making happens.
Actually, I don't disagree because sometimes we actually agree on up here. I turned to my CMate about 10 minutes into the speech and I said, from what she's saying, this sounds like a fairly conservative speech so far. It changed, but she was talking about no broad-based tax increases, keeping the car tax phase out in, all things that I think are great ideas. And then she started talking about maintaining the Rhode Island promise, the CCRI funding, the housing bond, this, that, and the other thing. And I don't know where the money's coming from, but I don't want to be too critical because the details will be in the budget. This is supposed to rally people. That's the purpose of tonight. Let's see the actual details, because that's what the legislature does. We look at the details.
That's right. Well, Al, right, as I said, we have a Democratic senator here, a Republican representative, but I can tell you folks, bipartisanship is not dead, because I'm told that the Senate Democrats allowed Rep. Newberry to use the Senate side bathroom. Very unusual to allow crossing, so there is still some getting along up here on Smith Hill. So thank you both for joining us and providing your thoughts. We'll check back in with you as the budget process continues. And I'll sign off from the State House. For Ted Nesi, back to you.
And it shows we're making progress along the way, that the Democrats and the Republicans
just brings
are getting
everybody together, doesn't it?
So really, Joe, this is the thing. So tonight is kind of the party where she says certain things. Now she has to be able to sell it.
Right, she has to sell it.
That starts Thursday.
No question. The budget will be the first thing as far as selling it. How is she going to pay for these programs? And where is the new revenue going to come from? For example, if she puts marijuana in there and she expects X number of dollars for marijuana, you know, and the General Assembly decides we're not going to do that. Now the General Assembly has to find that money to take its place. So it puts them in a very difficult position. So we're going to see where this money is going to come from and how she's going to have this revenue to pay for all these programs.
It's interesting you mentioned that too, because as we said with the sports betting, I wonder if they'll be on more high alert this year, thinking we can't rely on something that we thought would be a surefire.
Well, especially, I totally agree with that. They're going to be very conservative in their estimates this year on what the revenue is going to bring in. And the marijuana, both the Speaker and the Senate President said that's not going to happen this year. So if she puts that in the budget, say it's going to bring $25 million or more in, and they don't pass it, they got to find that $25 million somewhere or cut programs.
Right.
Her critics have, I'm sorry, Shannon. Her critics have long said that we have a spending problem, but we've heard that with this governor, the past governor, and past legislative sessions.
We hear that all the time. We hear that nationally. It's a spending problem. There's been very few governors who have really cut back because people don't want to see their own programs cut back. You know, everybody wants government cut back, but when it affects them personally, no, don't cut that one. And that's one of the problems they have.
And the thing the Republicans and Democrats agreed on tonight is that we need to be like Massachusetts. It seemed like both of them said that.
And the one thing in the two speeches, they both, the governor and a minority leader, both agreed on a line item veto. The problem is the rest of the General Assembly is not going to support that.
Right. All right, Joe, thank you very much. Joe's going to be back tomorrow morning on Eyewitness this morning, starting at 4:30 with analysis. Thank you very much for joining us for this special presentation of the State of the State. Our in-depth coverage continues later on tonight on Eyewitness News at 10 on Fox Providence and 11 on WPRI 12.